Thank you, Dr. Mulholland. Thank you, Abbot James. And thanks to your fellow monks for honoring us with this award. We're grateful for that the monastic community's desire to recognize us and our work following the death of our daughter Shannon. Vicki and I have been involved in this part of our lives for a quarter of a century now. At times she's been the lead spokesperson, and other times I have. We found that playing tag can be distracting, so typically one or the other of us presents the message. I'm speaking tonight, but that does not mean that we don't both feel exactly what I'm going to say. We are grateful to everyone involved in the video shown here. It shows that our efforts have been faith-based at their core. They have spanned the political spectrum, and they reflect our understanding of the relevant social justice issues that we faced. I was able to reconnect with the Abbot community here about 11 years ago when Abbot James asked us to speak with the monks about forgiveness, to share our story and the path of forgiveness we had to walk, not for anyone, but for ourselves. We have come to realize that any other path would have been disastrous for our souls, but also for our physical well-being. Abbot James and the monks, it is our hope that your recognition of us this evening might encourage others to consider the issue of the death penalty, which we only came to understand after Shannon's death. Vicki and I understand that our story is not an easy one to receive or process, and if there are children for whom the story might not be beneficial, we understand if you need to step outside with them. In sharing our story, we ask the Holy Spirit to guide each of us this evening in listening with the ear of our hearts as encouraged by Saint Benedict. Our story is founded in the lives of our parents, who laid the cornerstones of our faith. Also, we both attended Catholic schools from grade school through grad school that built our understanding of the Christian principles which helped us through our ordeal. Many Benedictine monks and nuns played a major role in our formative years. Vicki went to high school at Mount St. Scholastica Academy in Nauvoo, Illinois, and then joined the Benedictine convent there for 6 years, leaving before taking final vows. And I also might note 2 years before I met her. I didn't spring her. In my youth, the Basilica at the Abbey in Conception, Missouri was our parish church, and our pastor was a monk there. I went to what is now Benedictine Mount Michael High School in Elkhorn, Nebraska, and St. Benedict's College, now Benedictine College. From this foundation and in our experience, we learned that the church's teaching on the death penalty is not understood by many people. We ourselves had to dig into that teaching for our understanding. The death penalty can easily be an abstract concept. The experience of the murder of a loved one cannot be understood in anything other than the abstract until one finds themselves in the middle of the reality. It was a reality in which we were thrust as we learned of Shannon's death. The only way we can help others to understand is to share our experience. We share our family's experience with the utmost compassion for you as you listen to this story. As we were about to follow Shannon's casket into the church at her funeral, we were informed by detectives that they believed they had identified her killer, an acquaintance from grad school. 2 days later in Philadelphia, 2 other detectives said that they, quote, knew in their gut that the individual mentioned to us earlier was her killer. They explained her case would likely be treated as first-degree murder, and that they were clear that there was a death sentence as a potential outcome. For us, the death penalty was no longer an abstract concept. When that suspect was brought in for questioning, he failed a lie detector test. The detectives let us know they thought they had their man. But his DNA did not match that found at the crime scene. If not for the DNA, we cannot know what that suspect might have fared. But we have come to know other suspects convicted of murder on circumstantial evidence and sentenced to death, only to be exonerated later. This was one of several oops in the murder investigation. But the idea that someone innocent might have been charged with Shannon's murder and faced a death penalty prosecution was quite sobering for us. We realized we were not uninterested parties in the evolving developments. Our potential involvement, even if tangential, in the killing of another human being was disorienting for each of us, and we concluded it was inconsistent with our understanding of calling ourselves Christians. We realized we needed to make our beliefs known. 2 months after Shannon died, we told Philadelphia police we would not support a death penalty sentence for her murder. Soon after we did so, senior homicide prosecutors and a special assistant to the police commissioner came to visit us and told us that our death penalty stance would complicate the murder investigation and could lead to a not guilty verdict for the assailant. It took 4 years for the police to capture Shannon's murderer. By then, he was notorious in Philadelphia and led to uncovering of a major police scandal for mishandling sexual assault cases. The assailant left Philadelphia in 1999 and turned up in Fort Collins, Colorado in the spring of 2001. He began attacking young women there. As the attacks were unfolding there, police in Fort Collins sent a broadcast to law enforcement agencies around the country for look-alike crimes attacks. Philadelphia police saw a resemblance and sent DNA results from Shannon's case to Colorado, which matched the Colorado cases. Ultimately, credit records were matched across the 2 cities to identify a list of 38 individuals in the respective locations during the respective crime scenes. The assailant was one of only 2 viable suspects on that list. It was the credit records that did him in. Shannon's murderer was arrested in Fort Collins, Colorado on April 23, 2002, after attacking 8 women there. Shannon was the only murder victim among 14 known assaults across the 2 cities. Physical evidence left no doubt about the serial assailant's identity. After the arrest, our stance on the death penalty was reported by the Philadelphia Press. They also reported that the DA indicated that they would pursue a death penalty in the case despite our wishes. The Philadelphia Daily News published an open letter to us by editorialist Michael Smerconish saying we didn't have a right to oppose the death penalty because of the havoc and fright the rapist had wrought in the city. The Daily News allowed us to explain our position, and given our public stance, prosecutors conceded to negotiate a guilty plea for Shannon's murder with a sentence of life in prison without parole. Sentencing was on May 30th, 2002. After the sentencing, the DA held a press conference to reassert that the death penalty was appropriate in the case and that our opposition was immaterial. She went on that if the case had gone to trial, we would have been in, quote, the anomalous position of testifying in favor of saving the life of a person who had no regard for the life of their own daughter, unquote. Lynn Abraham was right. We held human life in higher regard than Shannon's murderer. But she was wrong in asserting that ours was an anomalous position. Our position followed Christian principles laid out in the Gospels. Our experience in Shannon's case has led us to work for a path for justice outside of the death penalty. In our work with many other individuals, the death penalty the death penalty was abolished in Maryland in 2013. We have also worked in more than 20 other states on campaigns to eliminate use of the death penalty. In some cases, we've been successful. In others, we have not. Along the way, we have come to know with much respect many on both sides of this argument. Among them are Fred and Betty Romano. Their daughter Dawn was murdered in August of 1987. The murderer was captured later that year, sentenced to death in 1991, and executed in 2004. Shortly before the execution, a front-page story in the Washington Post told of the physical and psychological toll the 17-year wait had taken on the Romanos. After nearly 4 decades of marriage, they were separated and heading for divorce. Both were in poor health. The article said that, quote, each blames the future largely on the anguish of the past, unquote. Fred said that if the killer had, quote, stayed in prison for life, it might have been a lot better for my family. Betty said of the experience, it beats you to death. We have learned that the excruciating wait for the outcome of the death penalty case is soul-sapping and physically taxing. The Romano case took 17 years. A recent controversial execution in Alabama was 35 years after the crime. On average, survivors of murder victims wait more than 20 years for the execution and death penalty cases. Juxtapose these time spans against our experience. Shannon's assailant agreed to plead guilty for murder if he did not face a death sentence. Because of the plea negotiation, 37 days after he was captured, the assailant was sentenced to life in prison without parole for Shannon's murder. Our legal proceedings were over. If he had been sentenced to death, we would still be waiting 26 years on for the sentence to be carried out. We would have been regularly required to appear in court for appeal after appeal, reliving the testimonies about the vicious murder. Dr. Robert Enright at the University of Wisconsin has spent the last 35 years doing research, writing, teaching, and therapy on forgiveness, focusing on reducing anger in individuals who have been treated unjustly. He says that hanging on to our anger and resentment sets off reactions in our brain which lead to the secretion of hormones that are toxins in our body. When we have too much of this for long periods, it can lead to a variety of adverse maladies. As Betty Romano said, it beats you to death. We have seen firsthand that wrath is truly deadly. We have been asked, with our opposition to the death penalty, if we loved our daughter. At Shannon's funeral, our parish priest who gave the homily included an observation about Shannon from some of her friends. Karen Kost, a classmate at Duke University, wrote, quote, the things I loved about her most and desperately miss are her qualities of the heart, her passion, how caring and considerate she was, her energy, and her never-ending desire to think of others and do well for others. Shannon was quick to boast of her friends, but the 3 people she loved to boast of most are her parents and brother. It is rare to see a family as close as the Schiebers, and their loss is immeasurable. She appreciated her family more than anyone I know. We love Shannon dearly, and her death meant part of us died. But we knew that a death penalty for her assailant would not bring her back to life. Our opposition to the death penalty did not close the hole in our hearts, but it did keep it from festering with extended anger and hatred that would ruin our own lives. One death in our family for this crime was enough. We believe that our daughter remains alive in Christ, and it is our profound hope that we find a place in his heart also, his most sacred heart, where we might enjoy God's mercy. As I move to my final thoughts here, I want to come back to what we understand as the Christian principles underpinning our position on the death penalty. In the gospel story about the scribes and Pharisees presenting a woman about to be stoned, Christ did not ask them about the evidence against the woman or her injury to other parties. He didn't respond to the question about his thinking regarding the law calling for her execution. He simply indicated that anyone among the would-be executioners without sin should cast the first stone. They all had to walk away. I have never heard this story interpreted in a homily as pertaining to our modern death penalty, but for us, its meaning is glaringly apparent. If we wish to call ourselves Christians, the idea of putting Shannon's murder to death was not about him, it was about us. Many people do not realize that homicide is listed as the cause of death for those who are executed in murder cases. Christ's command that those without sin should cast the first stone when he encountered would-be executioners meant that we had no right to be party to putting a fellow human being to death. We know that some of you listening tonight came with a different opinion about the death penalty than ours. As we move from the matter being abstract to a real event that we faced, our conviction to oppose the death penalty has been strengthened at each turn along the way. We sincerely hope that none of you ever have to consider this issue in anything other than an abstract context, but ask that you at least consider what we have learned about the death penalty, if you have ever believed that it is appropriate. Thank you. Good evening.